So, I've heard that one of the big problems in America at the moment is that Trump's supporters take him literally, seriously but not literally, and Trump's opponents take him literally but not seriously. And I'm hoping this evening you'll be able to take me both seriously and literally. As Richie said, I'm not a scientist, I'm not an engineer, but please rest assured that any of the science that's used in the formation of my arguments has been put together by people significantly more erudite than I am. And it doesn't come from the locker of alternative facts. It is the real thing. So I'm Ciaran. I work at Anglian Water. I run the communications team there. And I want to challenge you this evening to kind of help me with something that we as a business and an industry are really struggling with at the moment. I'll give you a bit of context. I'll talk about the challenge. I'll talk about the nature of it and just how significant that challenge is. And then I welcome sort of any views you've got to challenge my perhaps preconceived perceptions of what the right answer here might be. So to start with, I guess providing safe, clean drinking water is at the heart of what water companies do. And since privatisation, we, along with every other water company in the business, has invested billions of pounds in securing the nation's precious water sources. But I need to share a secret with you, really, and that's that even today, this provision of safe, clean water isn't as rock-solid a certainty as I think you and I would expect and would like for it to be. And this is a problem that's only going to get more significant in the future. Last year, the government challenged the water industry to think and to understand more fully the future challenges and solutions in terms of our resilience to the risk of drought. And you won't be surprised to hear that the industry responded enthusiastically with what we believe to be the fullest and most comprehensive national water resource study that has been undertaken in this country. It was a colossal piece of work. It was written by independent consultants, it was peer-reviewed, and there was a panel of leading experts who were very much behind the production of this piece of material. Now, we knew things were bad even before we got the experts on the case, but I don't think we realised quite just how bad they are. And it made it clear in this report that if we carry on with business as usual, droughts are likely to become both more frequent and significantly more expansive in geographic terms than perhaps we previously understood. And you won't be surprised to hear that Anglian Water, in particular, is committed to playing a full part in addressing those challenges in the future. The clue is in the name. Anglian Water without water isn't much of a business proposition. But we as an industry can't possibly hope to solve the problems alone. And there are partners you'd expect us to talk to. There's government, there's local authorities, there's regulators, the National Infrastructure Commission and the like. But then there are customers too. And that's the particular group of partners, and I think that customers are our partners in this challenge. That's the particular group that I'd like to discuss with you this evening. And we genuinely need your help because we're going to need to use every single tool in the box to deal with this challenge that's ahead of us. We'll need more efficient use of water in the home, in business and in agriculture. We will need to reduce leakage further. We'll need a new approach to sharing water across regions, bearing in mind that increasing resilience in one area might affect the level of resilience in another. We'll need new sources of water and new places to store it. We'll need tried and tested techniques, but we'll also need new and emerging technologies, things like smart meters, to help us get on top of this challenge. And customers, perhaps more than ever, are going to need to be at the heart of our response. And the industry is exploring how best to engage with customers on long-term issues like resilience. And with the scale of ambition, it will be considerable. Increasing resilience in this way won't be unaffordable, won't result in unaffordable changes to bills as long as we take this forward on a collective and timely basis. But it will require investment, and that is likely to have an impact on bills. And I'll give you some context about that in a statement a little bit later. And that is where the perhaps barrier to us being able to take this forward on a collective and timely basis stands. There's a crystal clear need for us to help our customers understand the scale of the challenge that we're dealing with, and therefore make them comfortable with the scale of proposed future investment that we're looking at. To qualify that statement, we know that water has to remain affordable for all customers, and rightly so, given that it's essential for life. Ultimately, how we respond to this challenge of more frequent and more severe water shortages depends on the country's appetite for risk. The prospect cannot be eliminated entirely. So it's going to be important for government to establish what is acceptable in terms of levels of resilience to drought, thereby informing policy, regulatory, planning, implementation of water priorities for the water sector. And we think that government and regulatory decisions in that area should be significantly influenced by public opinion. And that is where I need your help. How do we, the water industry, engage people meaningfully on a topic that they don't think about regularly, if at all, about a product that in contextual terms is actually pretty cheap, that many people actually think is free because it falls from the sky, about a resource that almost all of us take for granted, and about an issue of future water shortages that they can only conceptually imagine and that they're unlikely to think is in any way going to happen in their lifetime. So I'll give you a little bit of context which will hopefully help stimulate the discussion. As I said, customers' top priority for water services is a safe, reliable supply of water at a price that they can afford. And to deliver this, it's critically important that the water industry plans for the long term, because the decisions and investments that we make now, that we make today, determine the level of service that the industry can provide well into the future. Water customers, that's you and me, we already face the risk of drought. You will know that over the last 40 years there's been a number of droughts, and they were worse than those that have been used as the basis for planning to deal with those droughts. And those droughts had significant impacts on both customers and on the environment. In 1976, I think a few of you will remember that, there were severe restrictions, including standpipes in the street. In 1995 and 1996, supplies to customers in Halifax and Bradford were only maintained by 600 tankers every day, shuttling water from Kielder down to Yorkshire. And in 2012, 2 dry winters caused conditions in April worse than any historic drought in the south and east of England. And the situation here only recovered because we had an exceptionally wet summer, the wettest on record. And I recall that all too well, because I was the guy having to stand under an umbrella on the banks of Rutland Water in the pissing rain, staring down the barrel of a BBC camera, trying to convince them we were still in drought, which was no mean feat.
But you came across very well.
I did my best. And drought events in the future may well be different to historic droughts, though. And the problem is, it's what's gone before that we've typically used to plan for what we're going to deal with in the future. They are the basis for our current water resources plans. And the context in which they happen is going to be different as well. We already plan to secure the resilience of our operations to incidents like floods and fire and to drought. But increasing pressure on water resources from factors such as climate change, from population growth, and from the need to reduce the amount of water that we take to protect the aquatic environment all call for an increased focus on the drought resilience of our supply systems in the context that we're going to be in the future. Now, this study was the first, we think, to look at the picture for public water supply in England and Wales, considering the combined impacts of the challenges of climate change, population growth, and the need to reduce abstraction. It took a longer-term view, a 50-year view, whereas most water resources management plans just take a 25-year view, and it developed new models of drought and using climate change impacts and the resilience of supplies. It assesses England and Wales' long-term needs and the options available for meeting them. So what did it tell us? Well, there are 6 headline outputs from that research, which I'll share with you now. Some of them you won't be surprised to hear. Number 1, there is a significant and growing risk of severe drought impacts arising from climate change, population growth, and environmental drivers to reduce abstraction. Climate change first. Hotter temperatures are going to drive up demand for water. No surprise there. They'll also drive up evaporation during spring and summer. And the impact of climate change on rainfall, though, is uncertain, but it is possible that prolonged periods of dry weather will follow. Drier climate futures would markedly increase the risk of drought, just looking as far ahead as 2040. And whilst water resources in some areas are resilient to that, there are large areas that aren't. For example, a dry climate here in the east of England would see the risk of experiencing a severe drought treble, which is a very big change in the current status. Population growth. Now, the scenarios we used indicated that the population growth for England and Wales was between 6.6 and 16 million by 2040, so massive degree of variance there, and between 13 and 33 million by 2065. But the killer fact here is that the least resilient and most water-stressed areas in the south and the east are also the areas that are going to be subject to the most growth and the most climate change risk. So you're kind of building up a perfect storm in this area. Talking about preserving water for the aquatic environment, now I don't need to tell you guys that the UK is home to globally important wetlands, rivers, chalk streams, and they're all valued by water customers and they rely on water availability. And a resilient natural environment also forms the basis of sustainable water supplies. Therefore, it is in the national interest to conserve water for the environment, and the abstraction of water will need to be reduced to restore the natural resilience of that environment. And restrictions on abstraction aren't just going to be felt by the public water supply industry, they're also going to be felt by agriculture, by power, by other industrial users. And the five water company areas that are going to face the most significant reductions in their abstraction are Affinity, Anglian, Severn Trent, Southern and Thames. So all in the south, or mainly in the south and east of England. And for those companies, it may be necessary to reduce the amount of water currently available for abstraction by between 5 and 50%. So up to half of the available water may not be available for the water companies that need to supply it to their customers. And that's not even thinking about agriculture and the industrial requirements for water. So, headline finding, first number one. Number two, there's a strong case for the UK and Welsh governments to consider adopting consistent national minimum levels of resilience. And basically that means prescribing much more directly the standards that companies are expected to meet, recognising that there are, and this is the key point, significant issues to address, including what they call interregional and intergenerational fairness. And we face some really tough choices about our risk appetite for severe restrictions on water use during major drought events, because the risks of these happening, as I said earlier, they cannot be entirely eliminated. We need to explore, and I'd like you to help me explore how. We need to explore with customers the intergenerational, so this generation, the next generation and that beyond, and interregional, so us, Severn Trent, Scotland, Wales, the interregional aspects of decisions that we might want to take at a company and regional scale. Number three, headline finding number three, and I actually think that this is where there's a small bright spot in an otherwise quite gloomy forecast, and that's that the investment needed to increase resilience is relatively modest when you compare it to the cost of drought. In most areas, the additional costs of becoming resilient to severe drought events are less than £4 per household customer per year. Less than £4 per household customer per year. If the right measures are taken early enough. And that is crucial, it's taking the right measures early enough. And bill impacts wouldn't even be immediate. They'll take effect gradually as investments made in demand reduction and supply options are delivered. The flip side, the analysis suggests that the benefits, that is the value that customers place on avoiding severe restrictions, is 10 times more than the cost. And in my head, and I'm no mathematician, that feels like a very compelling argument. So what else? Number four, there is no silver bullet. A twin-track approach, in fact, multiple tracks of approaches are going to be needed to include and they will include things like finding more water, transferring it around, as well as demand management. And when I say demand management, I mean helping, encouraging, and perhaps even forcing people to use less. That is the most appropriate strategic mix for the future. Perhaps controversially, there is a case for considering more extensive measures to demand management than those that we currently use. And there's two reasons for this. Firstly, we get a greater level of resilience to more extreme future shocks than those currently being considered. And secondly, it reduces the risk of us making investments that we might regret, on the basis that using less is considerably cheaper than trying to find more. And we have to acknowledge that the future isn't set. The report talks about more favourable futures, and they could well materialise. Would we look back with regret if we invested really heavily in infrastructure, only to find that we never or rarely used it? And that makes the case for demand management much, much stronger. But it's not easy. Ambitious demand management requires really significant behavioural change and significant future innovation to make the options both feasible economically and socially acceptable. I don't think any of you would thank me if I were to tell you that on any given street, odd numbers could shower on Monday, Wednesday and Friday. Even numbers got Tuesdays, Thursdays and Saturdays, and Sunday's water ration was reserved for laundry. That's not where we want to go. So looking big picture, interregional transfers and new storage capacity, so water coming from other places and storing it more locally, may represent key components of a more resilient system through a combination of localised initiatives and strategic schemes using, for instance, the River Severn and the River Trent to carry water across to the south and to the east. But connecting major supply systems has implications for river regulation, for water quality, for environmental risk, and in some cases, the nature of drought risk within the donating water area goes up as it comes down in another. So number 5, there is a case for spending some money now, but deferring some investment for the future pending triggers being hit. We refer to this at a national level as an adaptive plan. It supports our plans as they currently stand and balances the risk against opportunities to defer costs into the future. Such a plan would identify key trigger points that would determine which set of investments and policy interventions we put in place for, say, 2040 and 2065 horizons, depending on how risks actually materialise in the future. And that's all well and good, but there are some risks that are here right now and that we have to spend to invest to deal with right now. For instance, the risk of drought is present now, as I've highlighted. The government wants us to achieve sustainable levels of abstraction by the 2020s. We need to deal with that right now. But the impact of population growth, on the other hand, is uncertain and will play out over a longer period of time. And the most cost-effective approaches to increasing resilience, therefore, we believe, involve some spending now to invest immediate challenges so that we can avoid the need for more expensive options in the future. Finally, and perhaps least surprisingly of all the conclusions to come from the reports, industry, government and regulators are going to need to work together with customers on how best to respond to the risk of severe drought. Companies are going to need to come up with new ways of working across boundaries and with a wider range of stakeholders to optimise the use of what will become an increasingly scarce resource, particularly where transfers are concerned. We need to think about other types of customer too. Housing developers, for instance. How do we, as an industry, influence the housing development industry to increase the water efficiency of new homes? And there's a role for a supportive government policy and regulatory framework in helping us to achieve that. So in conclusion, the findings of the report add weight to the already recognised need for companies to deepen their engagement with customers. Please don't leave here today thinking that all of a sudden we've woken up to the need to talk to our customers. This is something that we've been on a journey to try to improve for quite some considerable time now. And we're really trying to embed customer thinking in the heart of our business, just as we're asking customers to embed water at the heart of a whole new way of their lives. But this report throws into sharp relief the importance of doing it well, for everyone, and doing it soon. Now, it's all well and good for us to sit in a nice art gallery with a glass of wine and theorise about how we can save the world from itself. But that's not the point. The point is that water is a universal human right, both now and in the future. And it's a right for everyone that, in my opinion, comes with an obligation to engage with the future of that resource. That's me, that's you, it's the people in the Golden Triangle, it's people in Yarmouth and Lowestoft, it's the people who own the large rural estates in our region, and it's the apprentices who graft so tirelessly on our nature reserves to record the precious diversity that we clearly value so much. And that is my challenge to you. If you were in my shoes, if you were running the communications department at Anglian Water, what would you do to stimulate that debate and engage in a meaningful way with that full spectrum of society? No pressure here, but bear in mind, the better your answers, the sooner I can retire and go out and enjoy the fantastic environment of our region that all of this, of course, is set out there to protect. Thank you very much.